What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaya is what the world needs.
Hello, Avaya family. I'm Brielle Starr, online event coordinator for Avaya. Avaya is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Diane Metcalf, is with us today to talk about gaslighting, the most significant cause of C-PTSD. Diane is an experienced advocate, speaker, and author specializing in dysfunctional family dynamics and toxic relationships. Drawing from her personal healing journey from narcissistic, physical, and emotional abuse and neglect, she developed effective recovery tools that she happily shares with others seeking growth in their own recovery. And she is well versed in topics such as narcissism, family dysfunction, abuse, and relationship warning signs. Welcome back to Avaya, Diane.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be back.
So glad to have you here with us today and so excited to learn a little bit more about gaslighting, what to watch out for. So just to get us started, could you just tell us what's meant by the term gaslighting and why it's so important that we understand what it is?
Yes, gaslighting. Well, since we're talking about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other types of emotional distress, you have to mention C-PTSD, which is kind of a subtopic of PTSD. Um, the C stands for complex, so it's a little different, and it's something that affects people who have ongoing mental stress, lots of stressors, traumatic events. So it's the ongoing part that contributes to the complexities that we're talking about here of PTSD. So, when you live in an unpredictable environment and you never know when the next attack is going to come, and by attack, I mean verbal abuse, physical abuse, bullying, shaming, blaming, I don't know, being lied to, any of those things, and gaslighting. Um, you are always in this heightened state of distress and stress. And, we call that the fight or flight response. And so that is what contributes to the development of CPTSD. And so gaslighting, to answer your question, is um, it's abuse, it's manipulation in the form of mind games and lies. So it's something that gives the person doing it a great deal of power and control over the person they're doing it to. And the reason they do this is because they want to control the person's beliefs, feelings, aspirations, goals, um, perceptions, actions, reactions, you name it. They want to control all of that. And so that's why they gaslight.
Yeah, sounds like a very tricky situation. Thank you for giving us a little bit of background about what that might look like.
Yes.
But I know it's so common that even if we know what that might look like, it's so common to in the moment be unaware that something like that is happening. Could you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about how we can recognize when someone is gaslighting us?
Well, when you're being gaslighted, you're going to feel confused. You may not really know what's going on. And speaking personally, I can identify with that. And in my case, it was my mother who gaslighted me for, well, pretty much the whole time I lived at home, starting when I was a very young child. Um, and so the way it would feel is that there'd be this confusion, and I would spend a lot of time trying to figure out, why did she say that? Why did she see this thing that we both witnessed? Why did she see it one way and I saw it a different way? And I mean, yeah, we all have our own ways of seeing the world, but this was very different. Um, and the biggest thing, not only the confusion, but um, if I if I disagreed with her perception, um, she would at times remain very calm and rational sounding, trying to convince me that what I perceived was not accurate or correct. And that would make me feel very irrational by comparison. And that is something very off-putting too, because your senses, your five senses are telling you, I just saw this. or I heard this, or I felt this. And then you've got someone standing there telling you, no, you didn't see that. You didn't hear that. You imagined it. That's what I would be told. You imagined it. Um, you dreamt it. I never said that. I never did that. So if you're hearing things like this, you're probably being gaslighted. And so once you're aware of this, and you have this understanding now of what it looks like, what it feels like, when it happens to you, you'll now notice it. You'll be like, oh, I think they're gaslighting me. And so now you can remember it and you can sort of see what they're doing with it and maybe why they're doing it. Um, Another thing they'll do is use your fears or insecurities against you. Um, they will tell you, oh, it's okay to do this or to do that, even though you may already know it's not appropriate or ethical or moral to do. They'll tell you it's okay. So they're lying, they're convincing you, they're manipulating you into doing what they want you to do, even though your authentic self or your higher self will tell you, no, this is not right. So you've always got this discrepancy between what you know on a soul level is happening and what they're telling you is happening. You know what you are witnessing and experiencing, and they're telling you you're witnessing or experiencing something else completely. So there's always this, what I call a surreal feeling gap. And you're always in this mode of trying to make them agree. And that is called cognitive dissonance. And it's the cognitive dissonance that is the really harmful part of gaslighting. The gaslighting itself is one thing, it's the cognitive dissonance that it causes that causes the harm to us. And so I can tell you from my own experience, I walked around with a little WTF above my head all the time, trying to figure out, you know, am I really seeing things the way they are, or am I not? By the time I was a teenager, um, I was so full of self-doubt from being told that I remembered incorrectly. My memory was terrible. I'm dreaming this, I'm imagining that. And I began to doubt my senses. I began to doubt my judgment. And at a certain point, I began to doubt my sanity. That is what this will do to you. So
Yeah,
if
it's
anybody's feeling this way,
yeah.
again, it's probably from gaslighting.
Yeah, it sounds like a very tricky situation to navigate, especially with the after effects, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And so now that we know some of those ways to realize that we are being gaslighted, what is the best way, do you think, to handle a situation if you realize you're being gaslit in the moment?
I think it's really important to be fiercely on your own side. So when you realize that you are being gaslighted, um, come to your rescue and don't accept the gaslighting. And by that, I mean, you don't even have to say anything. You just have to, in your own mind, say, they're gaslighting me, and I'm not going to accept or believe what they're telling me right now. If you want to use your voice, if you want to say something, I'm not going to try to tell anybody to do that because you know your own situation. You know who the person is who's gaslighting you, and you know what could be risky to say and not say. So I'm never going to tell you to speak up for yourself. But if you feel you're at that moment in time where it's time to speak up or defend yourself, you don't have to be mean, you don't have to be hurtful or even angry. You can just simply say, I don't remember it that way, or I don't see it that way, and I'm comfortable with what I know, and just move on. And, of course, they may not let you move on because they're going to offer you that tug of war rope where they're going to want to have that back and forth with you. And they're going to want to try to convince you to see it, whatever it is, their way, because they want to control how you see things and what you believe and how you feel. And so it's going to be hard for them to let it go if they know that you're not accepting their gaslighting, which the biggest way to gaslight is to rewrite history. So if someone's trying to rewrite history for you, then that is definitely gaslighting and you don't have to accept it. So one of the things I learned to do was to journal, and I'm sure in classes like this, eventually somebody's going to mention journaling because it is such a helpful tool. Um, I started doing it because I wanted a record of what I was seeing and feeling and hearing and smelling. And like, I wanted a record of my experiences the way I took them in and the way I remembered them. And so I journaled pretty much as sort of a way to go back and validate myself. So when somebody would gaslight me, I could go back into that journal and compare what they're telling me happened, or telling me that I said this or that they said that or didn't say whatever. I could go back and validate that and verify for myself in my journal. And that was very helpful because it further established for me the reality that they are indeed gaslighting me for real. It's not something I'm imagining. It's really happening.
Mm.
So in the moment, make a note of whatever it is that they're trying to gaslight you about, and journal about it later, and journal about not only your perceptions, but your feelings about it, and really validate yourself, because I think that is a very helpful thing to do in healing from gaslighting.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love that you brought up that advocating for yourself or really listening to yourself, because I feel like it's so easy in a conflicting situation to just maybe blame yourself or think that, yes, I do have it wrong if this person is telling me that, but
Yeah.
really like considering maybe I do have it right and looking for some of those signs that you shared with us earlier can be really impactful.
Yes.
And so you've talked about it a little bit, but what can happen to our mental health and well-being when we are gaslighted? What are the lasting effects? We've talked a bit about the short term, but what about those lasting effects?
Well, living in a state of cognitive dissonance, it contributes to not only the self-doubt, um, but, you know, self-doubt in a lot of areas. You're doubting your memories. That was a big one for me. Like, I truly started to believe that my memory was just awful, and I couldn't rely on it. And then I started to doubt my eyes, my ears, I started to doubt my own senses. And I mean, I was probably a late teenager at that point. So I was already really starting to suffer from ongoing gaslighting and cognitive dissonance. And that's about the time I started journaling and trying to figure out what was happening, because I knew there was something happening to me and I knew she was doing it. But, this was many years ago. So there was no talk about narcissism or gaslighting or cognitive like none of that, right? So this was something, and there was no internet. So this was something I was having to struggle with on my own, and also intermittently, with some professional help. Um, but one of the things that can happen with this ongoing is you can start to rely on the gaslighter for your truth. You can start, because cognitive dissonance has to be resolved in some way, right? One of the ways we resolve it, that surreal gap between what's actually happening and what you're told has happened. You've got these two things that are conflicting. And the way that we often can resolve that is to just agree with them. It's kind of a surrender. And I remember it wasn't a conscious decision, but I remember it happening where I just stopped trying to figure out what was going on. I stopped trying to figure out why I remembered things so differently than the way she did. And I just started to accept the gaslighting. And I agreed with her. So I started to believe that, yeah, my memory was terrible. And yeah, I can't trust my eyes or my ears. And that's a terrible place to be, because now you've given up all of your control and you are totally under their control, and they can manipulate you and rewrite your reality for you. And so between the journaling and the idea that something really nefarious was going on here, and some therapists who kind of gave me some tools to use, I was able to pull myself out of that. And I also had to, at some point, I grew up and I left home and I moved to a different state. And I didn't go no contact, I went low contact. Um, but I learned to set boundaries. And you'll hear a lot of boundaries. About boundaries, I'm sure, throughout this um, session as well, or not just my session, but others as well, because boundaries are incredibly important when you're trying to heal from the effects of dealing with toxic people. So when I grew up, there were no boundaries. I didn't even know what a boundary was. It was nothing people talked about. And so to learn that these things exist and you need to have them in order to protect your mental health and well-being, that was news to me. But I learned how to set some boundaries and enforce them, because you can set them, but if you don't enforce them, they're not going to do anything for you. So that's, as far as moving on and healing from this, that's another thing I think everyone needs to realize. You do have to have boundaries in place.
Yeah, I love that you brought up that journaling practice. That sounds like that could be so helpful, as well as that boundary setting, which I know a lot of people have a hard time with. I would
Yeah.
love if you could tell us a little bit more about how to set boundaries, especially for people who feel like it might be rude or mean, or they just didn't grow up doing it like yourself.
Right, right. Yeah, when I heard the word boundaries, I thought, well, yeah, I know what a boundary is. That's when you put up a wall and you just don't interact with that person, or you just, and that's not what a boundary is at all. And you're right, some people do think it's hurtful. A boundary is just your line in the sand as far as what you're going to tolerate and what you're not going to tolerate anymore. It's not even about them, it's about you. So to set a boundary, you need to know, first of all, what the behavior is that you're not going to tolerate anymore. So we'll say gaslighting. So when I decided to set the boundary, I decided I was going to use my voice finally, and I was going to stand up for myself. And so when she tried gaslighting me, and it would help, I think, if I gave an example. I came home on a visit, and she didn't realize I was out in the kitchen. And my mother was in another room taking care of her mother, my grandmother, and she was being very loudly verbally abusive to her. And she came out of the bedroom, and there I was. And it caught her off guard. And I said, "Do you do this frequently? Like, are you yelling and screaming and swearing at her a lot? I mean, what's going on here? What's happening?" And she looked at me and she said, "What are you talking about?" And I thought, here we go, because by then I kind of knew what was happening, or what was about to happen. And I said, the yelling and screaming and swearing I just heard from out here. And she said, I never did that. And I said, and I quoted her, and I gave her an example of what I just witnessed. And she said, you must have dreamt that. I never did that. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it was 2 minutes ago. And then I started to really worry about her mental health. Like, I thought, maybe she really doesn't even know she's doing this. I don't know, but I know that she's doing it. And now she's trying to tell me that she didn't do it. And that was an example of the extreme gaslighting that I remember from back then. She would just blatantly, looking you in the eye, tell you, I never said that. I never did that. You dreamt it. You're the one that has the problem with this wild imagination. You are the one who, has this crazy imagination, and, don't blame me. It's on you. You are the one. And so I did not accept that anymore. And I told her that. I said, look, I know what I heard. You can tell me that you didn't do it, but we both know that you did and that I heard it. End of story. And I walked away. So that was an example of a boundary. And she didn't offer the tug of war. She didn't try to sit there and convince me, because I think at that point she knew there was no convincing me anymore that, what she said, or what she wanted me to believe was true. So that was the beginning of me letting her know I wasn't going to accept it anymore. So again, if you're going to say something verbally, just know your situation and pick your timing, well, because I wouldn't want anyone to do something risky or something that would put them in harm's way. So you can simply just not accept it, and know that you're not accepting it. I would say another thing you can do is educate yourself. Just keep educating yourself about toxic people, about gaslighting, about the other harmful effects, about C-PTSD. There's lots of different symptoms you can experience, and not everyone experiences all of them. So I would say, education is key as well. And you know, Avaya is a wonderful place to continue educating yourself with all of the information that you need to heal from these, toxic situations and toxic relationships. I would say to build a support group of healthy people, um, let go of the ones who aren't. Get yourself into a support group if you can't afford therapy, or if you can do therapy, do that, and join a support group too. Just do all of it. Do as much as you can financially and with the time that you have. And I would say, when you decide to heal, it is a commitment. It's not something that happens to you. You have to do the work, and the work is not fun, and the work takes time. So you can't compare your healing to anybody else's. You can't put yourself on a timeline or on a schedule on the calendar. Um, it's a lot of work. You'll cry a lot. You'll hurt. Um, but it is worth it. It is worth taking that deep dive and getting to know yourself and untangling what's inside that toxic people or relationships have contributed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for all of that really lovely insight and suggestions. I also think it's so important that you brought up in a situation such as standing up for yourself or setting that boundary to really be careful about the timing and the safety of your situation. I think it's great that you mentioned that because not every situation is the same, and it's important to be aware of how safe you really are going to be at any time or depending on the person. So thank you for giving us that really important reminder, as well as all those other lovely suggestions.
Sure. You're welcome.
And let's talk a little bit about how people can dive deeper with you in your work. I know you have a free chapter of your book about gaslighting, as well as people can purchase your entire book called Lemon Moms. And we have a button for each of those below if you'd like to tell us a little bit about those.
Okay, well, the free gift is chapter 16 from the first book. The series is called Lemon Moms, and it really just began as one book. And the term Lemon Moms, that was kind of a little nod to the lemon laws regarding buying a used car. When you buy a used car and it doesn't work right, it's called a lemon, and there are laws to protect us from that. And so, I used to call my mom a lemon. She just didn't work the way other mothers worked. And, I think it was kind of a healthy thing to do, even though I didn't realize I was doing it for that reason. But it took the focus off of me and it being my problem, and it put it on her that it was her problem. So it was the first book, Lemon Moms, a guide to understand and survive maternal narcissism. And that then became a second book, a workbook that I kind of wrote almost alongside the first one, because at the end of every chapter, there are action steps that you can take. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to make a workbook, put those action steps in the workbook, and add more to it. So the workbook's a little bit more of a deeper dive into some pretty tough questions, but they're the kind of questions where you have to dig within yourself and you really have to make yourself uncomfortable and challenge yourself to answer these questions, but they're all part of the healing process. And then the third book in that series is affirmations. Affirmations were a big part of my arsenal for healing. And I wrote a little over 200 affirmations that they really all have to do with healing gaslighting and the effects of cognitive dissonance. So all of those affirmations address those kinds of things. And so the book that's available today is a combination of all three of those books. So you get all three in one download. So that's the other offer that I have today. So read chapter 16 free. Learn about gaslighting and all the symptoms and the things you can do. Then if you're interested, you can get the whole series of 3 books in one download.
Lovely. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for offering those great resources. And as a reminder to everybody watching or listening, you can click the buttons below to check those each out on Diane's website. And then, are there any final insights you'd like to share before we wrap up, Diane?
Be fiercely on your own side. Protect yourself. Embrace your inner child. Give him or her a hug. And know that you can heal. Know that you can move on. And being here today is a good step in that direction.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you for being back here with us. And I also want to thank our Avaya students for joining us today, and we will see you again soon. Take care.
Avaya has changed my life.
Avaya has made me the woman I am today.
Avaya is my home.
Avaya is personal freedom.
Avaya is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about Avaya.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, Avaya, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaya is what the world needs.